lecture coordinator for MDSG. Newcomers tonight who don't know about MDSG, or do you all know about it? Just briefly, MDSG is a peer-run, not-for-profit organization that helps individuals with mood disorders find support, and we do that in the form of running 16 support groups a week. We meet on Friday nights right upstairs on the second floor at Beth Israel. We meet on Wednesday nights on the Upper West Side at St. Luke's, right near in the Columbia area. And we run groups for people who suffer from depression, bipolar illness, young adults under the age of 30 have their own group. We have a family and friends group and a newcomers group. And the magic is in peers helping peers. So all of us volunteers, of which there's probably about, 50 or 60 in this organization, we all either have a mental illness or have a loved one who does. And when we provide support, we all begin to feel that we're not alone, that we are, in fact, having a mental illness is not our fault, that we can find ways to manage it. People are in different stages of recovery, and so for those of us who are further down the road in recovery are a lifeline to those that aren't yet down the road of recovery. So there's real magic and it's very empowering to come to these groups. So if any of you are interested in checking us out, please do. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, let me tell you a little bit about our next lecture, which is going to be on November 13th. We have 4 of the top researchers in New York. It's called What Top Researchers Are Studying That Might Help You. A panel of leading research scientists are going to be talking about new antidepressants that may help sexual dysfunction, combined wake light therapy and lithium, new forms of cranial massage stimulation, new medicines that target glutamate, low-frequency magnetic stimulation, cognitive remediation therapy. I could go on and on and on, but all the state-of-the-art research that's going on is going to be talked about by the heads of Columbia University Medical Center, Mount Sinai, and Cornell Weill Medical College. So it's going to be really quite an extraordinary lecture with the tops in their fields. And you can come and get your questions answered. So, okay. We have a very special guest tonight. His name is William Jiang, and he has written a memoir called A Schizophrenic Will, A Story of Madness and a Story of Hope. And this book alone is an inspiration to anyone who is facing extraordinary challenges. And we get to have the author in the house tonight. And it's an honor to have you. Let me tell you a little bit about him for those of you who don't know. First of all, before he was diagnosed with an illness, he was a gregarious, popular, and brilliant young adult who was on the fast track to success, graduating from Stuyvesant High School and sailing through Stony Brook University when he was blindsided by the first symptoms of the dreaded mental illness, schizophrenia, in 1992. His story describes a torturous but ultimately very hopeful and inspiring journey to recovery. Will was determined to figure out how to live a meaningful life despite multiple hospitalizations, setbacks, and derailments from pursuing his aspirations and dreams. And what he has learned about his recovery, he wants to share with us. And as he says, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I want to just, before I give him the podium, I just want to read an introduction from his book that was written by his brother, Leif. My older brother Will and I have been close throughout our lives. As kids, our aunt described us as two peas in a pod. We played together all the time, whether it was handball, role-playing games, basketball, boxing, play fighting, or computer games. We had fun, and he always included me in his activities with his friends. Will was certainly the pathfinder of this duo, figuring things out and showing me the way. When Will went off to college, I saw how hard he worked. 1, sometimes 2 full-time jobs with a declared double major. Before his first breakdown in college, he was 49 chin-up strong, read more than 1 book a day, bright, vibrant, and driven. The topic of my college entrance essay for MIT was to describe who was the most influential person in my life and how he has shaped me. I wrote about Will and how his work ethic inspired me to work hard and eventually graduate as salutarian from Stuyvesant High School in New York, arguably one of the most competitive public high schools in the U.S. Even after Will's breakdown, he was a source of inspiration, help, and support. I remember Will getting me my first academic summer job after my freshman year at MIT. He literally walked through NYU's physics department and knocked on all the professors' doors asking if they needed an intern. I don't think many brothers would do that for each other. I remember Will after his first breakdown as an undergraduate at Stony Brook University and being locked up in their mental ward. The future was uncertain at that time, and it wasn't clear if we would ever get Will back. When I visited Will in the ward, he looked like he dropped in weight by 50 pounds, had bruises on his face, and was noticeably uncomfortable. Later, I learned about the paranoid thoughts that led him there. Even with mind-numbing medication, Will still was able to graduate from college. It took several years of medication and psychiatric hospital visits before Will figured out what medications and doses worked for him. In the meantime, he earned a master's degree in library science. Excessive thinking, like the thinking that one does when studying or trying to understand complex things, triggers his illness. It was remarkable that he was able to drive himself through school mentally when all he really could have done was just lie back and let the government checks come in the mail, and when the very act of educating himself was potentially dangerous because it could set off his illness. After graduate school, Will became involved with mental health publications, was the best man at my wedding, and is working as a librarian. We still keep in touch, and it always brings a smile to my face when he tells me that I'm not paid what I'm worth. I am proud to be his brother, and I hope that you find Will's story inspiring because being a part of it has greatly inspired me. Will.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Tori. And I want to thank Beth Israel for letting us have this space, and I'd like to thank MDSG for inviting me to come here and speak to you guys. And before I start, I'd like to shout out to my people, City Voices, Fountain House, and MDSG. Thank you for coming, everybody. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a dramatic reading from the first chapter of my book, How Far Down Does This Rabbit Hole Go? Then I'm going to do a little presentation about how the book came about and a little bit more that I think you guys will find interesting. So let me just start. Chapter 1, How Far Down Does This Rabbit Hole Go? My brain now needed to work faster. I was taking 23 credit hours that included Advanced Physics 1, Computer Data Structures, History of the English Language, Chinese, and several other difficult classes. The previous month I had taken 9 credit hours in an intense period that spanned 4 weeks. The courses included microeconomics, intermediate French 2, and 1 other class. Was this healthy? Well, yes, I suppose so, but I soon discovered that my total immersion in academics would prove to be a double-edged sword. That morning, I went to the administration building to check up on my attempts to make the government recognize me as a self-supporting adult. To put myself through college, I had been working as a janitor for 2 years. This was very exhausting in light of the academic load I was carrying. I desperately wanted to qualify for federal educational grants so I could continue my studies without having to work as a janitor and scrub toilets 5 days a week, and to be able to concentrate exclusively on my studies. I remember the financial aid officer's name. When I asked her about the grants and about how much money I would be receiving for the academic year, she replied, "None." I was devastated. It was just like the previous 2 years. "Your parents make too much money to qualify you to receive financial aid," she explained. I was floored. I told her I had been self-supporting for 2 years, and I asked her why the school still considered me a dependent. I didn't understand. I must have expressed some sort of strange reaction because Dolores came out from behind the counter to see if I was okay. I assured her that I was fine, and that's when the first paranoid thoughts came into my head. They know. They know I've been getting a few thousand each year from Mom. They know. I've got to keep quiet about this, I thought. I didn't know who I might have pissed off in the government. Still reeling, I walked to the student union. Despite not qualifying for grant money, I still needed to eat. And I had to sign up for a meal plan. So I quietly stood in line, holding my student lunch form in my hand, and waited for my picture to be taken. I remember my feelings of paranoia. With each passing minute, the intensity of the feelings increased, and I was scared. When it was my turn to have my photo taken, the food services woman asked me which meal plan I wanted. It was an easy question, but at that moment, it wasn't simple for me. In my paranoid state, everything had more meaning than it was supposed to. Thinking she was testing me, I hesitated. She said in a louder, impatient voice, "Which meal plan do you want to sign up for?" I blurted something out, and I guess it satisfied her. I put on my glasses when they took my picture for the ID, so that whoever was after me would not recognize me from behind the light-tinted lenses. I remember the look of distraction and fear in my eyes when I later looked at the ID photo. The day was off to a terrible start. Sometime later, I was riding in the car with one of my Chinese friends. A fear of Chinese gangsters suddenly took possession of me. I realized now I was delusional, but I was convinced that my friends that I had known for 2 years were Asian gangsters now, and they were going to drive me to some isolated spot and put a bullet into my brain. To escape, I would have to act fast and think smart. So I told them I was not feeling well to drive me to Stony Brook University Hospital. We were about a mile away, and I would feel safe and not be killed by them there. I would feel safe at the hospital because they couldn't trick me to go away from the hospital. Because I knew if they did, I would die. Away from the hospital, I would no longer be able to be in a safe zone. I knew they would erase me from the pages of life. So at Stony Brook University Hospital, I was quickly admitted, and I was relieved when I was put in a room behind a large steel door with a small glass window. I felt safe. I looked at the clock. It was 4 p.m. Good. I could get out soon and go to the police and tell them what was going on with the gangsters and that they were in league with some sick government plot to take financial aid from college students. And then I thought, the police. What if some of them were crooked? A journalist for the New York Times would probably be a better choice. It must be an immense conspiracy if the gangsters could actually reach out to Stony Brook. A teenager who looked like a rebellious drug user was in the room with me. He had messy hair, wore a black t-shirt, and ripped jeans. He began talking to me about his exploits with drugs. I spoke with him for a few minutes, but I wasn't going to try to befriend that guy. No way. I was too cautious about my health to become involved with the subculture of drugs and to expose myself to some awful disease. There was a quiet guy who was also in the room. I tried to talk to him, but he just remained quiet. I thought that was odd. Eventually I left him alone. Then, about an hour into the hospitalization, I began to relax. The staff brought a tall black guy into the room. He was a scary dude. Why was he scary? He just stood in the middle of the room and jerked his body around while standing in the same place, very erratically. His clothes were a mess, all wet, and after a few more minutes, he started to shake violently and got an erection that was clearly visible through his wet sweatpants. This guy just totally grossed me out. Two guards in red blazers put on latex gloves and subdued him, and they let him out of the room. I was wondering why they would allow a guy like that in the same room with people like me. I actually had no idea where I was. I didn't know I was in a psychiatric emergency room. I thought I was just in a waiting room. Another hour went by. I went to lie down in one of the rooms to rest. In the room was a swarthy looking guy. He had dark hair and olive skin. He was Latino. We struck up a conversation about Cervantes' Don Quixote. He told me he was a literature professor at Stony Brook University. I was impressed. I have always been impressed by people who are knowledgeable. We talked about the sadness and the futility of Don Quixote's dream. The fact that he chose to chase that impossible star was both sad and at the same time noble. We agreed. That the man of La Mancha could lead such a life of delusion and nobility seemed to be a contradiction to me, I remember. I think, in retrospect, that I too have been fighting windmills my entire life. After a while, I went back to the main reception area. They had brought in a cute little Japanese girl. I was attracted to her. However, I thought of myself as a taken man. I had a girl in my life that I possibly wanted to marry. My love interest was my girlfriend since high school. I was the kind of guy that would allow his eyes to wander and allow himself to talk to other girls, but I would never be unfaithful. I loved her too much. So I sat in the reception area without saying anything for a while. The Japanese girl was sitting next to the quiet guy. Naturally, I thought they were together. Eventually, I talked to her, and I asked her if she was with him. She said no. I thought that they were sitting a little too close to not know each other. That was strange. Then, while we were talking, she started looking at me with eyes full of lust. Her gaze made me uncomfortable. She stopped talking to me and just started looking at me while sucking on one of her fingers in a very sensual manner. We stopped talking. She stared at me, sucking on her finger for a while. I felt I had to say something. I told her I wasn't interested in her because I already had a girlfriend. She told me she didn't care. She just kept looking at me and sucking on her finger. It was sickening. At that point in my life, I considered myself good looking, but this was ridiculous. I thought this girl must be a nymphomaniac the way she was acting. So yeah, then I looked at the clock. Everything changed for me at that moment. I knew I had been there for hours already, but the time still said 4 p.m. I stared again at the clock. The little hand was on the 4 and the big hand was on the 12. I started to put 2 and 2 together. It was 4 p.m. when I came in, and now it was still 4? These people aren't here to help me. They're here to keep me trapped. They're here to take away my freedom. They're in league with the government. Damn, I fall into one of their cells behind a locked door where I can't get out. I walked towards the exit. A security guy in a red blazer told me in a loud voice to get away from the door. This is ridiculous, I thought. I'm an American. How can these people keep me against my will? I've broken no laws. I've hurt no one. I felt this is how Jesus must have felt. Jesus was wrongly persecuted in his life, just as I'm being persecuted now. I could have been a drug dealer many times in my life, picked up a gun and settled a few scores, or just become some kind of loser. I could have become somebody with no future who didn't try. I could have been someone who didn't work hard as a janitor to pay their way through college. I've had a hard life, I thought. I don't deserve to be treated this way. It's not right. But Jesus forgave his enemies, and so will I. Because I thought I knew exactly how Jesus felt. I reasoned, I must be an incarnation of Jesus. Images flew through my mind. There was an excellent movie called Amadeus, which chronicled a possible but far-fetched theory that Amadeus Wolfgang Mozart may have been murdered by Salieri, a musical competitor of Mozart. At the end of the movie, after Salieri confesses his role in the demise of Mozart, the priest had heard his confession. The priest looked shocked to find a heart so black. The scene cuts to Salieri being led through the mental asylum, absolving his fellow inmates. "I absolve you, I absolve you," he repeats to everyone he saw. He said this to the people in cages and the people in chains. He laughs an evil laugh and says, "I absolve everybody." And the movie ends and the credits roll. And for some reason, this aspect of the movie Amadeus went through my mind. The same instant I thought I was some kind of incarnation of Jesus. So I think that I, being a better person than Salieri, could truly absolve people. I think that people will recognize my goodness and feel better about being where they were. I walk around the room saying, "I absolve you" to people who are there. What happened next I did not expect. I saw a lot of activity behind the glass enclosure of the room where most of the people wearing white were. Two big men wearing white come out of the room where the doctors and nurses are. I braced myself, not knowing what to expect. Others dressed in white at the same time charged me from behind the glass enclosure. I was quickly surrounded by 6 men, and the 2 big guys rapidly grabbed each of my arms, and a third was at my back, with what felt like a gun. They led me to a room where I was sure I was going to die. I was sure they were going to kill me. I was kicking and screaming at this point. "Let me go!" I screamed. In the room, I saw a gurney. They dragged me to it. I was not strong enough to resist all the hands. There were too many of them. After they got me on the gurney, they covered my head and I was enveloped in darkness. At that moment, I thought of a sick movie I had seen about 2 years earlier called Faces of Death, where some devil worshippers supposedly were having an orgy of death and it was taped. This thought intensified the terror I felt. Were they going to eat me alive? I wouldn't let it happen. I struggled and struggled to no avail. I was a lamb, and I was certain they were taking me to the slaughter. It all made sense then. This wasn't some kind of government conspiracy. This was a conspiracy of Satan. No wonder it could persist so long and so secretively. Then after what seemed to be an eternity, I was on my back in some kind of straitjacket. Down the middle of the straitjacket was the word "no," written at least 20 times. What the hell were these people doing? I vowed they could kill me, but I'd never become one of them. I feared the consequences of not giving in to their infernal power. And then I heard giggling. I saw children in the room. There were 3 little girls there. I was shocked. How could these people do these unnatural acts in front of children, I thought? The children were just laughing and playing, oblivious to my fate. But they looked at me just as the adults did, with soulless, hungry eyes. These children must be the spawn of Satan. Their mix of innocence and evilness horrified me to my core. As I struggled and yelled, "Why can't somebody help me?" One of the men in red jackets, holding my head between his hands, said, "We are trying to help you." Yes, I know, I thought. Satan is the father of lies, and this devil is lying as well. Why doesn't he just crack my neck and end my suffering? It would be the humane thing to do. No, they all want me to suffer. They want me to renounce good. It will not happen, even though I'm an atheist, I thought. I had no idea these forces were at play on the very campus of Stony Brook University, my university. Wait until I get out and let the world know what's going on in this hospital. Sick. This ward is just a front for a sick secret society. I wonder how many people outside of this hospital are actors who help these sick people to trap people in this diabolic place. The men and women in white coats, who were some kind of medical staff, left eventually. Even the red-coated guard that I was hoping would crack my neck. But the little girls stayed. As time passed, I watched them play on the institutional floor of my room, very white. They seemed like normal little girls, but I could tell that there was something different about them. Something was not right about them. Finally, after being confined to that straitjacket for what seems like an eternity, a man who looked like a giant, about 7 feet tall, and a man in a red jacket, took me out of my restraints and off the gurney. They walked me to the door that I had entered when I came to this place. My heart leapt, even though my head felt heavy somehow. Maybe they're going to let me go. They opened the heavy metal door. Then they opened another heavy metal door behind that one. I can't run because they're holding on to my arms. The second door opens and I see my family. My family. How could they be here? They're supposed to be in Manhattan. My God, what's going on? Why are they here? Are we all going to die as a family? No, my mind yelled, but it was muted. They must have injected me with something, because strangely, these men don't seem to bother with my family. Nobody in my family was being restrained. I was led towards them, their faces I couldn't read. My family, mom, dad, Leaf, they're just standing there. I didn't understand. Are they in league with the devil? Why aren't they doing anything to help me? What's going on? I'm dragged away to an elevator and I go up. I'm barely conscious of what's going on. The last thing I remember is seeing the number to the door of my room, 1010. Great. I'm just going to be another story on New York City radio station, 1010 wins tomorrow. Just another statistic. My death will be made to seem as if it were an accident, I'm sure. The next 2 days are a dark blur, literally. I remember shadow encompassing everything. Darkness everywhere I looked. Some pinhole points of light poked through the dark walls of my reality. But what enveloped me was darkness. It was everywhere. The first thing I can remember is a nurse telling me that I was going to be presented to the team. I had no idea what to make of this. I thought maybe if I tell a good enough lie, they'll forgive me and let me go. So I waited in a chair until being summoned into a large room with maybe 15 people in white coats. Why are you here? One of the doctors asked me. I lied.
It's just an ambulance going by.
We're okay?
Yeah.
Alright, I lied. I took some red pills. Speed, I said. I guess it got me wired up. I took them to do well on an exam. There were no traces of drugs in your urine, said the doctor. I was trapped in a lie. Unless I could think faster than these exquisite liars, I'd be here for a long time, I thought. But I knew you can't outlie the infernal. So I remained silent. The doctor continued, Speed comes in red pills, but we couldn't find any traces of drugs in your system. I stood there silent. Looking at me, their infernal eyes burned into my head. I was asked a bunch of other questions. I can't recall what they were asking me, but ultimately I was let out of the room. I was relieved to get away from them. Looking back, yes, amphetamines affect the dopamine in the brain, as do many of the street drugs. I wasn't wired up on speed. I was naturally high. I studied and worked so hard those 2 years. I was at Stony Brook University. I think something snapped. I learned later that there is something called the dopaminergic theory of schizophrenia, which posits that the excitatory neurotransmitter has something to do with schizophrenia. The older drugs block dopamine in the brain. In other words, they have the opposite effect of many street drugs. On cocaine, I understand, you feel really, really good. So I felt really, really good naturally. The higher the dose of the antipsychotic drugs one takes, the worse one feels generally. This is precisely because of the effect the drugs have on the pleasure and reward systems of the brain. At one point, in the darkness of my first few days of hospitalization, I remember that I was in a medium-sized room with a lot of chairs, arranged for a group meeting. Some of the people in the room wore white coats, some didn't. I remember that people in white coats downstairs were the devil's people. They terrified me with their occasional fake smiles and hungry eyes. I remember the doctors were going around the room asking people why they thought they were here. It had to be a trick. It was a trick to weed out the strong from the weak and the wheat from the chaff. They were preparing to reap souls, I was sure. I felt I had to try to show that I was strong enough to survive by showing I could be insensitive and strong. I waited until the thoughts that were racing through my mind started to settle. and I noticed easy prey. A middle-aged Caucasian woman in the group talked with difficulty for a while about the reason she was there, that her husband was dead, and that she was depressed. The doctor looked at her and tried to comfort her. She talked through sobs, and it broke my heart to see her and hear her do this. But as soon as I could, I jumped on the chance to get out of there by mocking her and the death of her husband. I called her weak. I would do anything at this point to get out of the pit of hell in which I thought I was trapped. I would do things I never thought I ever would. The doctors looked at me in a way that said to me, "You will be here for a long time." I remember that the woman cried. What the hell was I supposed to do to get out of this place? Damn it. Then I felt bad because the woman was crying, but I couldn't ask her to forgive me. That would show that I was weak to the devil worshippers, and I knew what happens to the weak around Satan. That's the only scenario I remember clearly in the beginning of my hospitalization. I lost track of time, honestly. Days went by, and the next thing I knew, I wake up in a bed that is not my dorm room at Stony Brook University. My back hurts, and I groggily sit up. I realize I'm sitting on a gurney, and everything that happened to me in the emergency room and after comes back to me like a horror movie, with me as the subject of the movie. And I thought, I know what they do to the main characters of these horror movies. Sometimes it takes a little while, sometimes a long while, but eventually they die. So I got up and looked around my room, feet dangling from the gurney and wearing a hospital gown. I noticed the gurney I was sleeping on had its back elevated. That explains the sore back, I thought. I noticed the gurney was facing the window that had the morning light from the heavens streaming in like olive glory. That morning light was a reminder for me that of all that was good. My mother, my father, my brothers, Leaf Chung, Justice, my lover, the kind of life that I was living. I was pure of body and mind. I didn't do drugs or crime, and I was extremely hard working and of body and mind. I took that realization to heart, and I kept it there because I was sure I would need it. There were two doors that I could see. An institutional blue door was in front of me. It was closed. There's a door to my right. It was halfway open, and it was noisy beyond that door, but I wanted to explore my room so I could see what I was dealing with here. I noticed air vents near the bottom of the wall near a door, and then I noticed a very faint smell of sulfur in the air. And it made sense that these people would give me this environment. They wanted to remind me of their allegiance to Satan. So how better could they remind me of that than give me smells from hell? Fire and brimstone. The brimstone being the odor of sulfur that was permeating my room. I easily lifted myself from my gurney with my strong arms. I took in the rest of the room while I sprung to the ground and felt the cold floor beneath my bare feet. The room was painted white. All white. Depressingly white. And there was a square window to the left of my bed from which the good light was streaming through with a warm, life-sustaining yellow hue. There was a wooden dresser and a large blue plastic chair. The floor was made with institutional white tiles, the kind I had cleaned in the hallways of the first floor of the Social and Behavioral Sciences building as a janitor while going to school. I felt the need to go to the bathroom. I figured there was too much noise coming from the door to the right to be a bathroom, so I walked straight to the door to my front. I opened the door. It was my bathroom. It was small. It had a polished metal mirror, a toilet, a white tile floor, and a shower, and another institutionally painted blue door. I guess I'm sharing my bathroom. How pleasant. I started to make use of the toilet by urinating. Then I heard and felt a demonic presence in my room, right there in the bathroom with me. Because of the demonic presence, I understood that I would have to control everything I did in this place, everything down to my urination. Because going to the bathroom is a release, and a release is a sort of pleasure. I did so at my life's peril. So I'd better keep things Spartan, I told myself. I quickly finished my business and got out of the bathroom. After leaving the bathroom, I decided to check out what was beyond the other door. I opened it. What I saw was very strange. There were people in the hallway, but they weren't moving. They were standing in mid-stride as statues would. The hallway was half dark and half light, and one of the lights flickered. The hall was full of institutional furniture, and looked very much like a normal hospital. I walked up to what I saw was a wooden desk with with a large binder. I immediately saw my name written on one of the binders, and then I thought, what this could mean. In the Middle Ages, passion plays were done to teach and remind people inhabiting the English countryside of the dead seriousness of taking their religion deep into the core of their beings. I recalled my medieval English literature class the previous semester and a passion play we did called Everyman. In this play, the main character is called Everyman. It's an allegorical story where things are labeled with what they are supposed to represent. Every man represents every man and every woman. His journey in the play represents everyone's quest for what is necessary to get to heaven. To make a long story short, there was a book in the play. It was the book that contained the good and bad deeds of every man. I knew immediately that this binder with my name on it was my book of deeds. I realized this was to be the place I would be judged. Bewildered, I stumbled back into my room and walked to the window to be in the warm, yellow light, the pure light. The problem was that the light was emanating from outside the hospital. Yes, I was in the light, but the light was in the hospital and I was trapped in the hospital. I got on my knees, I bowed my head while I stayed in the light. I knew that I would need to be strong here, stronger than I ever had been. I whispered under my breath an atheist prayer, whatever the hell that is. Very good, thank you for that, your attention on that. I'm going to now use the beauty of Google Drive to tell you a little bit about the genesis of the book and a little bit about my life and things of that nature. So it's like a PowerPoint presentation except over the internet. So once again, my name is Will. You just heard the introduction and first chapter to my autobiography, A Schizophrenic Will, A Story of Madness, A Story of Hope. That's the cover. You might recognize it from the books in the back. It's a beautiful cover, I think, because it was done with an artist and who just does amazing art, and I also did a little bit of the graphic design, so I highly recommend that. And this is a screen grab to tell you a little bit about the history of my book, where you can see A Beautiful Mind is number 9. So if you see number 8, that's actually my book right there. So I'm pretty proud of that moment. It happened around Christmas or so, this past Christmas. And I think it was on my birthday, actually, about the 17th of December. So good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So the whole, I was a honor student in high school, Stuyvesant. It's actually just right around the corner, as were two of my brothers. Tori mentioned my brother was salutatorian of Stuyvesant, which is it's no small feat. He had a 98.7 grade point average from arguably the toughest school in the nation, and he's just an amazing guy. Like he had like averages of over 100% in classes, and then his teachers would tell him, "I'm sorry, I can only give you a 99 because nobody's perfect." That's just the kind of guy he is. So I went there, then I went to Stony Brook, and then I went to Queens College after my first break to continue my education, and I got a master's in library science from Queens College. After which I was pretty much stymied, because back then you couldn't work and keep your benefits. You'd lose your benefits, so you were really prevented from working for a salary, for all intents and purposes. Then I got involved. I sent a story to New York City Voices. I don't know if anybody's heard of that newspaper.
I've heard of it.
But it's a great newspaper, and I'm still working for it to this day. You know, pretty much off and on, and mostly on. You know, and this is actually their website, New York City Voices. .blogspot.com is their new address, and for some reason the story I wrote got to the first page, so I was happy about that. Basically back there, that was actually Dan Frey, the editor-in-chief of City Voices. So, hey, Daddy.
Hey.
Okay, so I started with City Voices, and then after City Voices, I worked for about 2 years there. Then about 1999, the Ticket to Work Incentives Act was passed by President Clinton. It was passed by both houses of the Congress, the House and the Senate, overwhelmingly, bipartisanly. And on the 17th of December, which is my birthday, it was signed into law by Bill Clinton. So it was a special day for me.
Can you explain what the Ticket to Work was able to do for you?
Sure, of course. So the Ticket to Work Incentives Act allowed me to go back to work and to utilize my master's, without which I wouldn't have like health insurance and things like that, medicine, important things, like right after that happened, I met Dan Frey, and he invited me to work for City Voices. It was really my first professional opportunity. I eventually became a webmaster for them, advertising manager, grant writer, things of that nature, and wore a bunch of hats. And it's been a good relationship that I've maintained over the years. But this is the book, also, just to give a plug to Mr. Ken Steele, who started New York City Voices newspaper. Okay, I don't know if anybody's heard of Kenneth Steele, but the library at NAMI New York City Metro is actually named after the man. So he was a very important mental health advocate. And I do recommend the book. And I read the book when I was at my second job. My first job being at Kingsborough as an adjunct lecturer in the library and for a year. And then the second book was, the second job I had, major job, was at New York State Psychiatric Institute, Patient and Family Library, where I was the chief for 7 years. And that's why I read this book. And reading his book inspired me to write my own, because I also thought I had an interesting tale to tell. So that's the Kingsborough website now. I didn't do it, but I could have. But that was my first real job. I was an adjunct lecturer there, as I mentioned, and it was a great job. This is the website on the New York State Psychiatric Institute website that's still there. That's my old library. I don't know if you can see, but we probably can't, but we had a beautiful view of the George Washington Bridge and the Palisades, and it was like a multi-million-dollar view. It was so gorgeous, and the patient's really blessed to have like such a healing place to come, and it's gorgeous. Through the seasons, like the fall, you can see all the leaves turn color. In the winter,
can anybody just walk in there, or
not anymore? No, not anymore. It's only for the patients at New York State Psychiatric Institute and the satellites, as well as their family and friends. So, but it used to be open to the public, and there was like a messy thing that happened, pretty much, and so they discontinued that policy, unfortunately. But it was for security's sake. So, yeah, that's the patient library website, and I want to say anything. And in the winter, it looks like Ansel Adams, because like the Palisades, it's gorgeous. So that's my book again. I was going to read a little bit after this one. All right, so I just want to talk briefly about economics and mental health in the United States. So this is a screen grab of the National Institute of Mental Health annual budget between 2010 and 2012. So you can see here that in 2010, it's like $1.489 billion basically. And it increases into 2012 as 1.517. You know, it seems kind of impressive, but it really isn't. Each year, their budget grew less than the inflation rate, which is 4%. But you know, people think, well, oh wow, $1.5 billion is a lot of money, right? I don't know. I don't think so. You'll see why. So it boils down to over schizophrenia has about, where are we? About this $277 million every year is dedicated to the study of mental illnesses, the basic study. That includes depression, I believe bipolar, definitely schizophrenia, things of that nature. So you have basically 5 or 6 major disorders that are sharing about $200 million, basically, right? I feel that is inadequate, and it's just insulting that there's not more effort given to this study when like one Apache helicopter is like $1 billion. You know, this doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense also when you look that the estimated cost per year of schizophrenia alone is $62 billion per year. And that's probably a very conservative estimate, because not only does it cost money, but it's a lot of suffering that goes along with that as well, right? So that's that. And let's compare the cost of schizophrenia versus the amount spent on basic research, right? So this is the cost of schizophrenia per year in dollars. It's a pretty big number, you know? And this is how much that's being spent on it at most per year. You know, it's like, you know, sharing the money, right? So, so it's less than 0.2% of the cost of the disease is spent on basic research to find treatments and cures for it by the federal government. So let's put that in perspective, just like really quickly. Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, White Plains, brings in $190 million per year. That's more than the entire budget of the National Institute of Mental Health for schizophrenia nationwide. That's ridiculous. So yeah, and I got to the number of White Plains because I was there earlier this year. It was a great time. Let me see. So basically at White Plains, there's 20 beds per ward, right? And there's $2,000 per person per ward. So that each ward is bringing in $40,000 per day, right? There are 13 wards. So, and then there's 365 days per year. So if you multiply all that, it's about 190 million. So my question is, why isn't more being done to, you know, help cure disease like schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, autism, and the list goes on. What is this, you know, avoidance of problems that can be stemmed by intelligent investment in science? I don't know. So I wanted to also, like, because I know most of you don't have schizophrenia here, so that's great. Very nice. But I wanted to offer something for the people with mood disorders, all right? Has anybody here heard of TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation? Raise your hands, please, if you've heard of it. Keep them raised if you're excited. Okay, well, I'm excited. Because I worked my library for about 2 years was right next to the brain stimulation people at New York State Psychiatric. It was during my tenure as patient librarian there that TMS got FDA approval for the procedure. So it's an FDA approved modality. Right now you have to pay out of pocket for it. But the thing is, hopefully very soon, for especially hard to treat cases of depression, it will be available as an add-on to medicine. Something about it creates neurons where there's like not enough, or it's like neurogenic is the term. And the good news is I talked to somebody from Neuronetics, which is the leading company, that creates this this great machine, and they said last count there were 8 states in which Medicare is funding the TMS for severe depression. So that's fantastic. But my question, once again, I have problems with this. Like, TMS was approved in 2010. Why are they dragging their feet where this could help save people's lives and save money and pain and suffering? I don't understand that either. But hopefully it'll be available in New York soon as a great alternative to ECT and things of that nature. So it's, yeah, it is. In the efficacy, in terms of side effects, no. There's a theoretical risk of seizure, but you just sit there in a comfortable chair, you have some magnetic waves put in into your prefrontal cortex, and it's surprisingly effective. Yeah. So, I mean, the good news is it works. Bad news is it's not in New York State yet. Hopefully soon. It's already in New England. I know, like, it's in Harvard MGH. I called them, like, hey, you guys got it? Like, yeah. So it's great. So that's TMS for depression. Very exciting. And then for people with psychotic disorders, if there are anybody here with those, I wanted to talk to you about, just briefly, about research into psychosis with this molecule, the DARP32 molecule. It seems to be a master. Back when I wrote the book and when I was first being treated for schizophrenia, there was the dopaminergic theory of schizophrenia, right? But there were also, a few years later, serotonergic and glutaminergic theories of schizophrenia. Turns out they're all right, according to Paul Greengard, the Nobel Prize-winning neurobiologist over at the Rockefeller Institute. In his seminal paper about DARP32, he calls it the master molecule because it precedes all 3 of these systems. So it proves all 3 of these systems contribute, the dysfunction of those systems contribute to psychosis. So, and I just want to let you guys know that Intracellular Therapeutics is working on a very exciting drug for that. It just finished phase 2 clinical trials, and I'm always like, way to go science, but it's very exciting. When I read about what this drug could do, supposedly it's good for depression, it's good for psychosis, it's good for insomnia, it's good for a whole lot of things. I'm wondering what it's not good for. So, just exciting, a little exciting thing. And now I wanted to show you guys about, just a very short documentary short about New York City Voices, which is the mental health newspaper which I still work for, and that I believe in their mission very strongly about empowering people with mental health issues, whatever they are. And it was in a film festival before and stuff like that, so I hope you guys enjoy. I'm only going to play about half of it. So,
Ken Steele's. Ken Steele was a mental health advocate of renown. And in 1995, he started New York City Voices when he was a patient at the Park Slope Center for Mental Health in Brooklyn. The newsletter was only 1 page, double-sided at the time, and he invited patients from the clinic to write for the newsletter. And that was in 1995. A couple of years later, 1997, Ken created a big cooperation with a giant pharmaceutical corporation called Janssen, which funded his projects. In 1997, the newsletter from a 1-page newsletter became a 36-page newsletter with funding from a pharmaceutical corporation called Janssen. And the newsletter reached 15,000 people instead of just a handful of people at the Park Slope Center for Mental Health. Ken Steele died in 2000, and he published a book right before he died called The Day the Voices Stopped, which you can pick up maybe at a library or through Amazon.com. Anyway, after he died, I was the one who took up the mantle of New York City Voices because That's what he trained me to do for 2 years. And for the next 8 years, I became heavily involved in production of the newspaper. New York City Voices depends on funding from advertisers and from bulk subscription sales. So that's what it depends on right now. But we've also, I have incorporated the newspaper into a 501c3 back in 2008, and we could all, the newspaper is also eligible to receive grants from foundations and private donors, though it hasn't really received that many thus far. In 2008, something bad also happened to me. I went off of my medication with a doctor's supervision, but it turned out to be a bad experiment, and I got very sick and psychotic because I had schizophrenia. And when I was sick, I lost my position with City Voices because I was behaving very erratically and behaving badly. So a board of directors took charge of the newspaper and hired Angela Serio to be the editor-in-chief. And she did a decent job and produced 2 issues. New York City Voices has done some remarkable work in terms of what we published. When A Beautiful Mind came out, that was big news, and we covered that. And so I actually met Sylvia Nasser at one of the functions in mental health where she received an award for her book. And I met John Nash at a cocktail reception where he was being awarded. And City Voices covered that. City Voices covered Jessica Lynch, who was the out of the closet in terms of her mental health, New York State, Miss New York State pageant winner. She went on to place 15th or 12th in the National Miss America contest. We also interviewed Jessica Yu, who was the Academy Award-winning documentarian for the Living Museum, and we also interviewed Electro Boy Andy Berman when he came out with his, electrifying book Electro Boy and was touring the country.
All right. So, and yes, I did get Miss New York State's phone number, actually. But she would never use me as a web designer. I don't know why. So other people that were mentioned were John Nash in that video. I had the pleasure of meeting the actress Jennifer Connelly, who played the wife of the brilliant mathematician John Nash in the movie. So that was my honor. She came to my library for about an hour or so, a little bit more, and we talked, and I was like, she's small, wow. It was interesting, completely different than on the screen without the makeup. And I've also met Ellen Sachs, the maybe people have heard The Center Cannot Hold. Met her last week. I can say I'm very happy about that. Now, I think the presentation is a little bit long for me to put out. I'd like Tori to come back up here, and maybe we could do a little something else.
Sure. Question and answer time.
Okay.
I can start the questions from right here.
Okay.
What is your strategy?
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn to manage this illness so that you could actually go back to college, graduate school, and work? What did you have to do?
To manage the illness, the most important thing for any mental disorder, but especially mood disorders or like psychotic disorders or whatever, you have to take your medications as prescribed, work with a team, your treatment team, like your doctor, your therapist. It's really important that there's a synergy there and that you're part of the team. Take your medicine. Also, what's helped me a lot is I have a lot of insight into my mental state. I mean, there's not a lot of people that, like, wait, I'm thinking a little bit crazy. Let me take some medicine. You know, to stop it, nip it in the bud. I can do that sometimes. Usually I can.